Here we are at the beautiful town of Tweed. Today, we'll be reenacting the fateful journey of George Morton and James Simmons, whose lives ended in a devastating dynamite explosion way back in 1885. We'll start at the ruins of the Ontario Powder Company, stop along Indian River where they spent their final night, and visit the explosion site nearby. At the end of their intended destination, Lock 28 in Burleigh Falls. So let's go and find those ruins. Not much left here of the old powder company now. It was all torn down. This here looks like it used to be part of the water tower. See, it's all been vandalized. It's definitely seen better days. Another one of the little structures here. Hard to tell what this used to be. Again, there's not really much to go by. We have some old pictures we'll look at. But you can just imagine the hustle and bustle which has been going on in the early 1900s. Okay, here's another old structure. Again, hard to tell what this would have been. Even got old pieces of metal on the ground here. It's all hidden in forest now. You probably drive by and not even realize it was down here. Our journey begins here at the ruins of the Ontario Powder Company in Tweed. Founded in 1883, this factory on Stokoe Lake produced the very dynamite that sealed Morton and Simmons' fate. This factory also has a story of its own. On August 22nd, 1903, there was an explosion at the factory, and that explosion destroyed the factory. But unfortunately, the blast took the lives of 3 workers that day. But despite that, the factory was rebuilt. But once again, on a cold February 4th, 1908, it exploded. Though this time, the factory was evacuated and no one died this time. So, obviously, that's a good thing. It was even rebuilt for a 3rd time. But this time, not for the production of dynamite, but for the storage. Eventually, though, the factory was bought by a competitor and fully dismantled. Although there is one building still remaining. During that winter, the old factory office was dragged across the ice of Lake Stokoe and put on an island for a summer home. Now, unfortunately, I can't go out there and show you guys what the cabin still looks like. But it is interesting to know that out there on one of the islands, someone's living, or at least some are living, in one of the rooms from this old factory. For now though, we'll join back up with Morton and Simmons. They would have loaded their wagon and set out early. Heading west, they traveled to the Neebing Hotel that was once along the Indian River. By nightfall, they would have found a place to rest. A brief pause before tragedy. So, let's head there now. So here we are in the old Victoria Cemetery. Now, when I was searching online, the papers did state that they were both buried in Tweed, but I could only find records of James Simmons being buried here. So I don't know if we'll have any luck finding George Morton, but we're gonna give it our best shot. So let's go take a look. So it's interesting here. I'm in the cemetery trying to find the graves of Simmons and Morton, but back at the ruins, when I mentioned in 1903 that there was an explosion that killed 3 workers, well, I didn't mention their names at first, but 2 of them were brothers here. Lyman Moon and his brother is right here with him on the other side. Charles Moon. Both died 1903, so it's a little interesting bit I just happened to stumble across here. Right here, we have James Simmons, born 1883, died 1885. You got his wife there as well, and it looks like his son and his wife. So, unfortunately, I wasn't able to find the grave of George Morton. Unfortunately, he could just be lost in time now in an unmarked grave, or maybe the headstone was too faded for me to read. But we did find some other interesting graves, and now we'll continue on our journey. Welcome to the mighty Indian River, or I guess we would be if it wasn't for all this construction here. But for our purpose, it's fine. This would be roughly the area where George Morton and James Simmons would have stayed overnight at the Neebing Hotel. Most of it now is obviously a lot of residential homes and everything. The hotel, or it'd be more considered like a rest stop, not a traditional hotel like you might be thinking of today. It's all long gone. But the river is still here. So here along the Indian River, they sought lodging at the Neebing Hotel. And from interviews that was done with Miss Smith, who, along with her husband, ran the inn, she started talking to them. And she was sharing tales that one of the men, she doesn't remember which one, said that he had 5 daughters and 1 son back in Tweed. She said that they had breakfast around 8 o'clock, each having 3 drinks. But she made sure to tell the paper that they were not intoxicated, so I guess they were no worse for wears after having the 3 drinks. And she said before leaving, she told the pair that they'll be back again for another day with her at the Neebing Hotel. Although one of them turned back and said, "You hadn't be better too sure about that. We may be blown to kingdom come." Now, with hindsight, that was quite the thing to say, because, as we know, their journey did not end well. The paper also goes on to say that another man overheard the pair mention that they had trouble with a dynamite box. Apparently, one of the boxes was not full, and from what the man could gather, sounded like they believed that there was danger in the condition of it. But they had a job to do, and they resumed their trek northwards towards Burley Fall and Lock 28. So let's continue our journey now and follow their trail to Burley Falls. Here we are at the site of the explosion. They say at 9:45, the dynamite exploded. It left a crater 60 feet wide and 8 feet deep. Nothing remained of the horses, wagon, and of course, the 2 men. It was just fragments scattered all across the land. They say that it was the rough corduroy road that likely caused the blast. And that just means that the road, it was made by logs because it was too wet, swampy. It obviously wasn't paved like it is today. So maybe it was a spark or a jolt that caused the blast. Witnesses told the paper at the time that the blast shook houses as far away as Campbellford, and that a black cloud rose like a cyclone from the site of the explosion, scattering debris for miles. The papers report that thousands of people flocked to the site of the explosion. In villages like Keene and Warsaw, windows were rattling and livestock were spooked. During the explosion, Mr. Wallace, a resident of the area here, who was a harness maker, said that he ran out of his house thinking that his chimney had collapsed. Mr. David Hillman, who was sorting potatoes at the time, said that he was startled when some of his potatoes jumped from the force of the explosion. It says Mr. Thomas Nolan, who was, again, living next to near the area, described that a pit was dug in the road over 60 feet wide with trees leveled for 75 yards. The paper also went in to describe the grim task of collecting the fragments. It is said that all that was left were pieces of flesh and clothing. Mr. Charles Stapleton was tasked with collecting the remains. He was really only to find some bits of flesh and bone, but he did find an arm that he said was blown 300 feet from the site of the explosion. He collected all he could and boxed them up in a small coffin and mailed them to the powder company in Tweed. The next day, Mr. George Esterbrook, who was the manager at the Tweed powder mill, arrived to see what was going on. And he confirmed to the papers that both the victims' names were George Morton and James Simmons. Both were family men, and he was deeply shaken by their loss, and it is said that he cared more about them and their families than he did the dynamite load. But he did note that it was Morton's duty to secure the loose packages, and he was, I guess, sort of suggesting that a safety lapse might have triggered the blast. And you might be wondering, well, what really caused this big explosion? And the truth is, we'll never know for sure what caused the blast. It could have been a spark from the horse's shoes. Maybe the wagon hit a rock on that bumpy road. Dynamite, especially back then, was very sensitive. And Mrs. Mahoney, who was living nearby, said that they were driving rather fast for such a load. But then that is contradicted by Miss Heen, who insisted that they weren't reckless, and she was pointing to the road itself as the probable cause of the explosion. Maybe you could say other possibilities could have been that the dynamite was just old or unstable, breaking down over time and igniting from a little jolt. Maybe it was packed poorly, as they noted back at the hotel stop. Or just the heat from the September sun. Unfortunately, again, we'll never know what really caused the explosion. And this Right here is unfortunately where their journey ended. But their intended destination was Burley Falls, where Lock 28 awaited them. Had they made it, they would have delivered the dynamite for the canal works. So, what we're gonna do is we're gonna head to their intended destination and we'll see what the area looks like now. So, let's go. So here we are, Burley Falls, Lock 28. It would have been George Morton's and James Simmons' final destination, where they would have unloaded their loaded dynamite and given it all to the canal workers to head back to Tweed, head back to their families, and probably do it again in maybe a few weeks' time. So come with me now, and we'll see the sights, and we'll discuss the final bit of our journey. They even got a little map here of the waterways. Got Georgian Bay up there, the Lovesick Lake with our Burley Falls, Campbellford. Pretty interesting map they have here, with some guides down here in case someone wants to learn a little bit more. What a great view you have here. Cottages across the way. The water is very calm, very nice. This isn't being used right now, but you can see the giant locks that hold back the water to rise and lower to let boats pass through. There's locks like this all throughout the water system up here. And without the men like George Morton and James Simmons, this would have never gotten completed. And here we are in 2025 at Lock 28, the destination that they never reached. The canal project relied on dynamite like theirs, shaping this waterway. This journey from Tweed to Burley Falls tells the story of ambition, tragedy, and lessons in safety that shaped our industrial past. So, unfortunately, this is where our journey ends. But if you enjoyed this ride, stick around for more. And thanks for watching.